Welcome to Confessions of a Parent Coach. I'm Coach, a mother of four, and potty talker, Ann Kaplan. This is the podcast where I confess something from my own parenting and coaching life, teach a lesson around it, and answer your questions. Even we parenting experts are far from perfect, and the real magic happens when we get down with all that imperfection. We get into the gritty side of parenting here, so earbud up and dive in.
Welcome into another episode of the podcast, friends. Oh my goodness. We're marching our way through October, aren't we? Holy mackerel. It's almost Halloween. What we want to talk about today on the podcast is the concepts of blame versus responsibility. And if you're a parent with a kiddo who's even just capable of talking to and up from there to any other age, I guarantee that you've been dealing with this topic at some point many times. I'll give you some examples as we go on. But first, I've got to start with my confession, because I got to say, working through this blame slash responsibility paradigm was a really big piece of my work, and it still is in other ways. But the example that I want to use today for my confession is when my oldest son was really struggling with his mental health. And you've heard me talk about that on the podcast in other ways in the past. I won't go into all the gory details on that one again here today for time reasons. But he was really struggling. He wound up having to go to treatment, and he didn't live with us for like a year and a half because he needed to do wilderness therapy. He needed residential care, et cetera, et cetera. And one of my huge preoccupations the entire time that he was in treatment was, is this my fault? Like, who's to blame for the fact that my kid is in this predicament? And even though I tried to show up my healthiest and all of that stuff in all of our family therapy sessions and in my own personal therapy sessions and talking to his therapist, a lot of therapy, guys. Even though I tried to show up my healthiest in those situations, in the back of my mind, I was just constantly like mining every word out of the therapist's mouth for some evidence that this wasn't my fault. Like, I needed it not to be my fault. I was so preoccupied with that. And it took me a really long time to realize that my preoccupation with whether or not it was my fault was only getting in the way of my son getting better. So, in a crazy paradoxical way, my need to know it wasn't my fault was leading me to show up in ways that were my fault and were actually hurting my kid. So it's like, if my whole focus is on trying to be blameless, I need to get rid of this focus on being blameless. And hopefully, as the episode goes on, you're going to see more clearly what I mean. But, it's natural and normal for us to focus on, who's at fault here. Even in just really simple situations, we don't have to use this like really high stakes example of your kid going away to residential care. I mean, we could use a simple example of, your kid making a mess in the living room, or bringing home a bad grade, or, trashing their bedroom, or sibling fighting. Our first like impulse is to be like, what happened here? Like, who did this? Who trashed the living room? Who, started it in the fight, right? Like, why didn't you do your homework assignment? Or why did you bring home this poor grade? Is it your fault, or is it a teacher's fault? You might not say the word fault, but let's be honest, like, that's what you're thinking about, right? It's so normal. It is so normal. And guess what? We see it all the time in our kids, right? Let's say I find a pile of junk in the living room, and it's all my youngest sons, and I say, Sky, can you come in here? Look at all this stuff. This is all your stuff. I would like for you to put it away. What's the first thing that comes out of my kid's mouth almost every time? Well, I'm not the one who made the mess. River came in my room and he borrowed all my stuff. Or I had friends over and they got all this stuff out and I told them to put it away, but they didn't. It's not my fault. So I shouldn't have to clean it up. And guess what? We basically, as adults, are essentially saying that when we're like, who started this, or whose fault is it that you didn't do well on your homework assignment? or, who trashed the living room, what we're really saying, that's a little baby part of us that's essentially saying the same thing our kids say, which is like, it's not my fault, so I shouldn't have to deal with this. And if we can just figure out who's to blame and it make sure that it's not us, then we can be off the hook. Even if that's just psychologically off the hook, like what I wanted, in that situation with my son. Like, obviously, I wasn't going to be like, well, it's not my fault that he's messed up, so I don't have to come to therapy sessions. Of course, I wasn't going to do that. But I just wanted mentally for me to be off the hook. I wanted to show up for my kid with like full certainty that it was really his issue and not mine. And so we just really are focused on that blame thing. But really, and I love that this episode is coming on the heels of like three pretty solid episodes about psychology and consciousness and doing our own personal work, because what you can kind of see as you do your personal work and you learn, like we've talked so much about, like holding your ego loosely and not being so attached to it and being more connected to your higher consciousness and all that stuff, wearing your ego like a cloak, not a skin. As we do that work, all of a sudden we start to think about things much, much less in terms of blame and fault, and we start to realize actually that nothing is anyone's fault. And we can start to think about things as, you know what? This situation might not be your fault, but it is your responsibility. It may be true that your friends came over for a play date and you three trashed the living room, but these toys are your responsibility. And when you're hosting a friend over, the state of the house and the cleanup after a play date is your responsibility. So it's definitely not your fault that the room is a mess, but it is your responsibility that the room is a mess. And that's something that kids will definitely have a hard time wrapping their head around. I mean, let's be honest, I just told you I'm a middle-aged woman and I still had a hard time wrapping my head around it when it was such a high stakes situation. It's natural for us to have a hard time wrapping our head around it. And it's still kind of true. And that makes it so much easier for us to wrap our head around that when we do our own personal work and really do sort of loosen that grip on the ego and connect more with that like higher state of consciousness. So, the truth is, I mean, especially if you look back on your life, especially the things that happened to you when you were a child, like 95% of your life isn't your fault. Shit just happens. But 100% of your life is your responsibility. And if you can switch from playing that blame game into that place of responsibility, life actually becomes it's crazy because you start to feel or notice that you have a lot more responsibilities than you did before when you were pointing the finger at everyone else. But those responsibilities feel 10 times less heavy. It's not about wrong and right. It's not about principle. It's not about righteousness or indignation or, trying to protect yourself from the pain of possibly having a part to play in this situation and being partially to blame about it. It just doesn't matter. Nothing is wrong or right. It's nothing is good or bad. Nothing is anybody's fault. It just is. So, I mean, think about that. Well, how would you show up in the world differently if blame and fault just literally weren't a part of the way your brain worked? What would that even look like? So, when we start to make that shift into, okay, well, everything in my life is my responsibility, even though most of it isn't even my fault, then we can start to look at situations and say, well, what is my responsibility in this situation? So if I come into the living room and it's trashed, I might have that lesson with my son of like, it is your responsibility to clean up this room. My responsibility is, well, number one, to make sure that the room does end up clean one way or another. We all know how consequences work. So my kid will either take on his responsibility and clean it up, or I will take on that responsibility. And that means I might take the toys and they might be in purgatory for a while or something like that. But ultimately, the state of my house is my responsibility, even if it was my kid and his punk little friends who trashed it. And it's also my responsibility to parent around that issue with integrity. Now, that's my decision because guess what? You guys, we're grown-ups. We can do whatever the hell we want, which we forget so often. This is like the moment we all looked forward to so much when we were a kid. When I'm a grown up, I could eat jelly beans for breakfast and I'm gonna, do whatever I want and let my kids eat cookies or whatever, and then we actually get to be grown ups and we're like, oh, I don't really think I can do any of those things. But you can. So just because the truth of the universe is that 100% of our lives is our responsibility. We get to decide what our responsibility is. And that's according to your own values, your own, goals and your own comfort, your own needs, like all of those things. Like maybe I don't care if my house is a mess. Well, then I probably wouldn't decide that it's my responsibility to clean my house or make my house clean, but I do care. Me and personally, I do care. So for me, my list of responsibilities, one of them is the state of my home is my responsibility. And I know what state I like my home to be in. And when my home isn't in that state, I actually can take responsibility for that and say, I choose that my house isn't in the state that I most enjoy. That was my choice. And I also am the one who decided that it was my responsibility to parent with integrity around that. And I also get to decide what parenting with integrity means to me. So responsibility can feel maybe burdensome to me, and especially from this way of looking at things, it feels very expansive. I get to decide, like, oh, cool, I'm in charge of this. Great. Because I get to decide how I want to deal with this. I get to decide how I'm going to go about fulfilling my responsibility, what my responsibility is, all of that stuff. This expansive freedom and feeling of agency and lightness around things that are out of my control, which is most things, is only accessible to me when I've let go of that who done it mindset of who's to blame, who did this. And I got to tell you, it's so much better for me. I just don't care. Like, I really just don't care. I don't get into arguments with my kids about who should have to do something. They'll either do it or they won't, and I will take care of it, whatever their decision is. I don't need to fight about that anymore. And I definitely don't get into arguments or engage in back and forth that are happening between my kids around sibling stuff. And I watch, so I would say that Mike and I if I had to give us like a score on evolution, I would actually give us the same score. I don't know what that score would be, but I feel like we're pretty equal in that. We're both super invested in personal development. But I will also say that there are certain aspects where one of us is nailing it and the other is on the struggle bus. And this, I think that I have grown a little bit further than Mike, just in this like blamey responsibility thing, because every time that he comes down to the kitchen and he sees stuff in the sink, he goes on a rampage to figure out who put stuff in the sink instead of the dishwasher. And then he wants to make that person have to be in charge of all the dishes and blah, 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 blah. And I totally get it. And I also am so glad that I don't care. I'm so glad that when I come downstairs and the kitchen sink is messy, I just, my mindset is like the state of my kitchen is my responsibility. And I absolutely will still hand, that sort of drain in my energy of having to clean up after other people on to the people who, contributed to that state. So I might, ask one of my kids to do a little bit more. I might talk to the whole family and just say, you know what, guys, guess what? I'm not cleaning the kitchen tonight because today I came downstairs to make dinner and it was in a terrible state. And you guys can all figure it out amongst yourselves who takes care of it and just walk away. It's not that I just take on everybody else's responsibilities by any means, but the truth is, like, I clean my kitchen not because I have to or because I should or because someone else is making me, because I like to. And so these ways of navigating these really common, honestly, like knockdown, drag out fights that happen in most families, they're only accessible to me because I have let go of my sort of egoic grip on making things the way they're supposed to be and getting people to level up and be who they're supposed to be, and who's in charge, who's to blame, who's at fault, blah 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 blah. It just doesn't matter to me anymore. Now, is that something that I could just lock into? No, I had to do my work. Like, that's something that organically evolved in me as I have continued to do that whole work that we've talked about in the past couple of episodes of raising my own consciousness and living a little bit more consciously and a less egoically and things like that. And I can tell you, like, to circle back to my example with my eldest son, like, my fixation on making sure that it wasn't my fault, it was causing me to hijack so much of the healing process for my son and for me, frankly. I mean, I would kind of hijack the conversation in coaching or well, yes, coaching sessions, because we also had coaching sessions and then also therapy sessions. I would sort of hijack the conversation because I was like trying to do this like investigative work as to like, why did this happen and why does he have this, and did he always have it, or did he just get it, recently? Was it because of this one thing that I did that made him have it, or is this just baked into his personality? And oftentimes the therapist would kind of look at me and just like, why are you, what's up, who cares, like, this is the situation that we're in. And I was like derailing it a little bit. And then also I think my like neediness was really sort of transmitted to my son, and so it was getting in the way of him being able to really lock into his work, because he felt a sense of responsibility to me. Like, I needed something from him. I needed him to tell me that it wasn't his fault, and to just tell me, like, of course I wouldn't have said this out loud, but what I really wanted him to do was basically tell me, like, you're amazing, mom. You never did anything wrong. I'm just fucked up. Like, that's kind of what I was hoping at some point would come out of all of this stuff. And like, that sucks. And it's not true, by the way. Like, of course, part of his problem was because of me. There's no possible way for a child to be struggling the way that my kid was and have absolutely nothing to do with it at all. I'm the biggest influence in his entire life. That's preposterous. And being able to just accept, like, it just is, it's nobody's fault necessarily. This is the situation that he's in. And we can also certainly look at the events that precipitated this moment. We'll never know if this moment would have been precipitated by another sequence of events if these events hadn't happened, because we don't have a time machine. Like, we'll never know. And being able to let go of that, like, I don't need to be blameless, actually. It's totally fine if I'm a contributor to this. In fact, I really have to acknowledge the fact that there's no possible way for me not to have been a contributor to this situation. Let's move on, and let's talk about what you need now and what you need for me to give to you instead of what I need you to give to me. So, you could kind of see how my wackadoodle obsession was a real stumbling block to my kiddo. And so, once again, it's a great example of doing your own work so that you can get out of the way, get out of your own way, get out of the people you love's way, all of that stuff. There's no way I could have kind of just finally given up that ghost if I hadn't been doing my own work to kind of just really see, like, blame and fault. It's so petty. It's so small. It's not real. It's nonsense. And I never would have thought about it that way if I hadn't at least had some experiences, even just during like a meditation or something like that, where you just see the world differently and you do that work to heal yourself and live at a different vibration, and everything changes. So I hope that's intriguing to you. I hope that you are interested in raising your consciousness and living at a different vibrational frequency for yourself. And if you are interested in that and what I say resonates with you, you and I might be perfect for a coaching relationship. And the best way for us to figure that out is to try it out in a free discovery call where you get to tell me what you're looking for and I get to give you my feedback, and we get to kind of co-create a vision for how you want to get there and see if I'm the person to help you. And I really, really encourage you to hook that up for yourself. Just click on the link, book it. It's so easy. It's free. And I can't wait to kind of team up with you and partner with you and see what we come up with. Have a great week, everybody, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye.
The episode is over, but there's more waiting for you. You can grab my free workbook, Getting Kids to Listen the First Time, that walks you through the fundamental principles I teach all of my clients and applies them to this very universal parenting challenge. So if you're sick of repeating yourself all day long or just want to learn more about my style, you'll definitely want to go to bit.ly/kidswholisten. And if you're ready to work with me, let's meet. Set up a free call at bit.ly/KaplanCall, and let's create an action plan that gets you exactly where you want to go. And of course, links to all this goodness are in the show notes. Thanks for joining, and I'll see you next time.